Welcome to Successful Dropout. This community is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those who dare to defy the status quo, step off the conveyor belt, and claim the best version of their life. I'm your host, Lonnie Gienger. Welcome to the movement that is Successful Dropout. Hey, Successful Dropouts. A few things here before we kick off the regular show. First, if you haven't already, join the forum at successfuldropout.com. That's where we all hang out as a community, and I would hate for you to miss anything. It only takes a few seconds to create a free profile, and then you should get in there and introduce yourself, and I would love to hang out with you. Also, if you love this community and want to play a significant role in helping it continue to grow, consider supporting us financially through Patreon. 100% of those proceeds will go towards our overhead for Successful Dropout, and also to pay for part-time staff to take things to the next level and make this community even more valuable. By supporting us, you can also get cool things like shout-outs in the community and on the podcast, merch, and even one-on-one mentoring with me on a regular basis. So please go check out patreon.com/successful dropout. Again, that's patreon.com/successful dropout, or click the link in the show notes. And now that that's all out of the way, let's move on to season 2 of Successful Dropout, where we dive deep into the things formal schooling and society never taught you, and where you come away with clear, actionable steps to put these essential life skills into practice today. What is up, Successful Dropouts? I am incredibly excited to bring you this week's episode. Many of you may not know that I have quite the family of entrepreneurs and podcasters. My sister has a podcast, Shalane, who's I own one of our businesses with her called Entrepreneur Before 25. That's the name of her podcast. My wife had a podcast that's still going called The Balancing Act. And actually, my dad has a podcast as well called Systems for Success. And I'm really stoked to bring you an episode that we recorded for his podcast last week in this new season of Successful Dropout, where we're learning all the things that formal schooling really didn't teach you. And one of those things is financial management. And that's what this episode is all about. So on my dad's podcast, Systems for Success, we do these things called family roundtable discussions. And it is exactly what it sounds like. We all get together physically in one place as a family. We sit around a round table, and sometimes Shalane has to call in because she lives a little further away. But we sit around, and the mic's in the middle, and we just riff around and discuss particular topics and teach on them. And this last week we did one on finances and financial management, and ultimately how to control money so it does not control you. And we share a lot of the things that my parents did with us when we were growing up as kids to help us learn about financial management, as well as some of the things that we personally do in our lives right now. So this is going to be useful if you are a parent or you're thinking of being a parent, to do some of this stuff with your kids, but it's going to be especially useful if you're not a parent and if you just want to learn more about financial management and how to control money, essentially, instead of the other way around. So I'm really excited because you guys kind of get to meet my family and my parents and my siblings, and especially my dad, who's an amazing mentor to me and one of my best friends, and also a very smart business leader and a great teacher. He's in the trenches while he's teaching too. He runs a very large national real estate investment and development firm, and so he practices what he preaches. And also, you should head over to systemsforsuccess.com and just check it out. We've got other episodes up there, a lot of them featuring our family, and we're all kind of involved in that project, helping my dad lead that, and he just does a fantastic job teaching in general, so I would highly recommend you check it out. But without further ado, let's get to the episode. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Systems for Success with much laughter around the table. This is a round table episode with the Gienger family, and welcome to our family, your family too, if you're listening.
So we had a request from our podcast listener family to talk about financial management, and specifically how we developed our financial management paradigms and processes in our family. So we're going to talk about that and see what comes up. So for starters, I will just talk a bit about, for Shelley and I, how we were raised. We were raised in families that were great financial managers, didn't have a lot of money, but learned to be very frugal. And so we grew up learning that the key to financial management, at least I did, the key was frugality, right?
I did too.
Being careful with every dollar you spent, and every dollar you spent, you made it last as long as you could. And when you bought something with it, you made it last as long as you possibly could. And you all kind of picked up on that, right?
Mm-hmm. I've had the same laptop for years.
I've had the same shoes for years.
I honestly hate shopping, so whatever you did works.
Yeah, no.
So that was our basis. But then we got married, and we started to realize, okay, we had to actually support ourselves and make money. And it got very stressful because when we first got married, neither of us had regular jobs. We moved to Seattle, not too far into it, and we ended up having to literally go door to door knocking on doors to get window washing jobs and clean gutters to make enough money to pay rent.
I didn't know this.
You didn't know this?
I didn't either. Really?
Yeah.
My parents did something similar.
I do that right now.
We've done similar. What are we talking about?
Lawn mowing.
Well, you
That
have to
runs in the
remember,
family too.
I was trained as a nurse, but we decided to do this so we could build our own business.
Right. So before she got a nursing job when we moved over there, it was very much hand to mouth. And even when she got a nursing job, because we didn't understand how to manage money, it was very stressful. I remember one of our first months of marriage, we actually sat down to try and figure out what we spent in the last month. And back then, the way you did this, you couldn't like pull up your app and see what you spent last month or yesterday or last 5 minutes, right? You get a statement from the bank and you would balance your checkbook, right? You would compare the checks you wrote, and you would actually handwrite down, what checks you had written, and then compare that with your bank statement. Neither of us had ever done that. We'd never balanced our bank statement. We were complete novices at anything to do with money management, and it started causing a lot of financial stress for us, which of course creates stress in marriage. In fact, yesterday or the day before yesterday. The day before yesterday we were in Idaho, Sky? When was it? Yes, day before yesterday, Sky and I were in Idaho, and we went to an event for some investors in a project over there. And we were talking afterwards to this gentleman who is a financial manager, a wealth manager. And, he's probably in his 60s, obviously very wealthy. He coaches some of the wealthiest people in Idaho and manages their money. And he also, just because he's passionate about this, volunteers teaching in high schools and universities about financial management. And he was telling us this funny story about how he teaches these classes to university students about financial management and how to, the magic of compound interest and how to create a budget and things like that. And then he asks the class, how many of you think that financial stress is the cause of many divorces or marriage challenges in America? And he said, invariably, everybody raises their hand. And then he says, how many of you have received practical training on how to manage your finances? And nobody raises their hands. And so he says, so what you're telling me is that our system is setting you up for divorce.
Wow.
And it's true. I mean, whatever stats you look at, some say in the 70s. I just read one recently that said 90%. It was an actual documented study that 90% of divorces are tied to financial stresses. So however you look at that, we just know it's not fun. It's not good for anything to have financial stress. So we experienced that, and so we started to look for mentors, read books, go to some conferences on financial management, and had never done a budget. At that time, we ended up finding a system called Code a Check, where every check we wrote, we would write down a code on our check register for the expense category that should go in our budget. And then we mailed that check register in to CotoCheck every month. And somebody sat at a computer and typed in all the codes and sent us, back then it wasn't electronic, they would send us a printed report of what we spent by category. So that was our first experience with learning to do something like budgeting, and then we started learning to create budgets. And then that made life a lot simpler, especially as entrepreneurs, as you all know, it's very, very important. Then we started having kids, and Kylan, you were the start. And we had never thought about how to, we actually didn't put any,
The guinea pig.
you know, we weren't raised with a lot of intentionality in this area, a lot of intentionality in other areas that our parents were great at, but not a lot of intentionality in financial management in terms of training. So we didn't really put any thought into it. So Kylan, you are a guinea pig, and we, I'm sure, messed you up in a lot of ways, but you survived and now are a pace setter at this.
Should we have a counseling session?
I'm good.
But tell us, maybe Kylan, from your perspective, what are some of the lessons that you learned as a kid growing up about financial management?
Well, the story that obviously sticks out in my mind, and I've told it, I think, a few times on my podcast, and to basically anybody else that's wanting to learn about kind of finances and approach that with their family, about the story. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old, and I wanted to buy a $20, well, it was $19.99.
You still remember?
RC car. Yeah, it was a blue, like, remote control RC car at the toy store, and first I wanted to buy it like immediately, but I didn't have the money. So I remember I had a talk with you guys, and you said wait. It was like 2 weeks or 30 days is one
30
or the
days
other.
is our
Yep.
standard.
Wait 30 days, and if at the end of those 30 days you still want it, then we'll figure out a way for you to get it. And so I did wait 30 days, and I still wanted it, but I didn't have the money. So then I remember you saying that you would loan me the money to buy this car, and but I had to pay you back, obviously. So as like a 6-7 year old, I'm like, I'm not really thinking about the payback part. It's just like, cool, I'm gonna get the money now. I'm gonna be able to go get the car today. So that's what happened. But you created a whole payback schedule with interest on Excel. You printed it out. You put it on.
Dad's face right now.
7-year-old?
You put it on the refrigerator, and it was, I don't know if it was weekly or monthly. It was regular time periods I had to pay you back, and then I would log the amount paid back plus
It was
the
weekly. It was
interest.
very small amounts weekly.
Yeah,
And
maybe it was frequent. I remember
Quarter or something like that
And I
weekly.
would-
It was in denominations you could do like $2 plus a quarter.
Right. 'Cause I mean, as a
tangible.
7-year-old, you're not making a lot of money in the first place. So it was like every dollar I earned for weeks just went towards payback, and it was like really, really painful. Not to mention, there's this just a Excel spreadsheet with my name on it, and that took all my money on the refrigerator, just staring at me every day. So
I
it's just
remember that.
not
You
a
were
great.
like agonizing over that.
And then of
towards
course
the
with the
end,
RC
like-
car, like I lost interest in it after like a week. So so it's a very so it's a very valuable lesson in
How did you earn your money?
consumer debt, I guess. You can buy something wanting that instant gratification, and then you kind of lose interest, and you're stuck with the debt forever. So
Yeah, do you remember how you earned the money?
yeah, Mom would pay me a couple cents per slug that I would kill with salt in the garden.
That's great.
There you go.
So it's a very
Great.
Wow.
the economies there aren't really that ideal.
Anything.
There's a lot of slugs for that car.
Yeah, it was.
You know what we're gonna title this episode?
So that put a
great.
good taste in my mouth for, or a healthy respect for debt, I guess, at an early age.
I'm pretty sure I watched you go through that and remembered you agonizing over that, and I'd be like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. But I'm by all means, like, I'm still not opposed to debt. I mean, just under the right circumstances,
Yeah.
debt to leverage certain things, but like consumer debt in general, though, generally try to avoid.
Yeah, I think that was a very early a principle we wanted to build into our family because we just saw how it destroyed so many people. And we made a commitment early on when we got our first credit card that if we ever were not able to pay off a credit card in full at the end of a month, that we would cut up that credit card. And have we ever cut up a credit card? I don't think we have we? So in 35 years, we have always paid off every credit card in full at the end of every month.
I've been scared to death.
There's been a few times we've come very close.
I mean, but like Tay and I can speak to the point of view of like kind of having that same mentality with it, but definitely like several months where like we haven't paid off a credit card.
So how did what was your lessons you learned about credit card? What was the first lesson you learned on credit cards?
Well, the very first lesson I learned on credit cards was like back in high school when I got my first credit card and basically just didn't care about planning to pay it back and just spending money to get, again, consumer debt, like Xbox stuff and stuff that I wanted right away. And then having to pay the interest, on that was painful. But then moving forward with like some of our businesses, there'll be months that we wouldn't have a paycheck, and so we'd be forced to like put a certain amount of bills and stuff on credit cards and float those, month to month. But we were a lot smarter at that point where before we would spend the money on the credit card, I would know at least like where the next paycheck, I guess, was probably going to come from.
Or the source of payment to pay it off.
Exactly. Even though it wasn't in our hands right away, it was like, this is a project in the works that has,
where you knew
this
it was
potential of
coming by this
payoff.
time.
And so I keep very, very detailed spreadsheets of all of that. So there's always like, this is how much debt we have on these credit cards, but this is how much is coming in and when it is coming in. And like, here's the balance. So I know at the end of the day, I can always like cash out all investments, like, and pay everything off and break even. It never dips below that in the negative. So if that makes sense.
Yep, that's excellent.
And he does that for personal stuff too, and then I do more of like the month to month.
Yeah, this has happened with business and personal credit cards. We honestly wouldn't be able to survive without floating those. And you calculate in, like, you're calculating in the cost of the interest on it too.
Yep.
So it's like if you are going to put debt on a credit card, say when I was like flipping a house or something, I'm building in the cost of that interest that I'm going to pay. And sometimes those numbers, a lot of the times they make sense. Mm-hmm. And then if you can factor in like the different benefits for credit cards and stuff like that, that's a whole nother ball.
Well, and we did the same thing with our car too. Like we have a new car and we have very low interest on it, and so it's like.
Right, so we had a chunk of cash. We had to decide, like, do we want to pay for our car like in full, or do we want to do a decent amount down? And at the end of the day, it depended on what kind of interest rate we got. And we ended up getting like 2.89% or something like that. So It was more worth it to not pay the whole thing off, keep that cash and put it in other investments like crypto, for instance, that's had a better payout. So.
Yeah,
I think the key thing, what you're talking about is, maybe it's consumer debt, but it's very strategic and thoughtful, very intentional with a clear payback plan.
Yeah.
That's
Honestly,
very different.
I don't think you and I would have been that thoughtful.
Yeah.
In our
we weren't that
as young
smart.
marrieds.
I know I wasn't that disciplined back then, especially.
I mean, I wasn't.
It's level 10 credit card spending.
So for us, it was just, we made a clear policy, just pay it off or we don't have it. But I think
you should have that mentality for sure.
Yeah, that's the key thing is how do you, what we want to do is to build into our family the opposite of what we saw happening in society, which is this absolute entitlement mentality where people feel they're entitled to whatever they want, even if they can't afford it, even if they don't have the money to pay for it. I have the right to get it, and that leads to this epidemic of consumer debt that just drags people down over time. So I figured, as a father, I figured, look, if we could teach kids how not to touch a hot stove, we could probably teach our kids the dangers of consumer debt anyway. Yeah. And so that was with you, that little lesson on interest in paying back a loan was a stab at that anyway. So at least made you thoughtful, it sounds like, about how you go about it.
And I would say some like mental checks to make sure you have the right perspective on it is like For instance, if you get really, really excited when your bank ups your line of credit and you have this mentality of like, we have more money now, then you know you've got that should be a big red flag for you. Like that's one thing. Or like Dad was saying, if you want something in particular and you've got a line of credit that's not used on your credit card and you're thinking, oh, I can go buy that should be another, red flag. We do that all the time, but it's to get points on the credit card. And I'm not thinking like we're going to pay for this with the credit card. It's that we're going to temporarily put this on the credit card and we're going to pay for it with this income down the line. So
right, we use our credit card a lot. We just pay it off every month. So we get a lot of points.
Yeah.
Like the trip we're taking tomorrow was
cash back.
all frequent flyer miles that we earned from credit cards.
Yeah, we just booked tickets for $11 to Boulder.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Denver.
Yeah. But no, that's true. Like the red, kind of it being a red flag. What was it that I was doing yesterday, or like a couple days ago? We're switching our travel rewards card over to a different bank because it has better reward options or whatever. And I got approved like right away for a decent amount. And I was like, got approved right away. And I was like, yeah, that's because I've got like $60,000+ of school debt on my name. And so my credit score is really great, but that's because I have debt.
Interesting. So I want to talk a bit about that. What you just mentioned. There is a myth out there that says that to have a high credit score, you have to have high debt. And that actually is not true. I can say from personal experience because we haven't ever, and I've always had super high credit score. What you do have to do is you have to charge something and pay it.
Yeah.
So very quickly when we started charging, when we charge a lot on credit cards, but when you pay it off every month, it's actually the paying off that gets you the high credit score. It's not the debt. So for whatever it's worth, it's the paying off, not the debt, that gives you a high credit score. Okay, so then kind of as you launched and went off to school, we started realizing that we needed to take this to the next level because we had, beyond our experimental child, 3 more.
Wow. The truth comes out.
That we're coming on here. And just, I joke about that, but Kylan is definitely a pace setter in this area.
I'm very grateful.
Which we'll talk about hopefully later how you do it now. You still, I think, we learn from you now. You inspire us now in terms of how you manage finances. First thing we did is we started, just Shelley and I started creating a budget and keeping track of what we spent. And it was amazing to see as we did that how much money was flowing through our fingers that we didn't know was flowing through our fingers. I mean, money is a bit like water. When you put it in your hand, it just flows through your fingers. And the key is not how much you have, not how much money you have, but how you manage what you have. And as far as it flowing through your fingers, the key is to not let any money flow through your fingers without your approval. Right? That's the key. Without your knowledge and approval.
Where the government comes in on that.
Right.
That's another podcast.
So when we started to actually track our expenses, we tracked our credit card spending, our check spending, our cash spending, any money that went out, we tracked every dime. It was amazing to see how much we spent on things we didn't know we spent money on. And it's still, and we've used Quicken to do that after CodaCheck. We've used Quicken now for many years to do that. And I can still go back and look from the early 90s, every penny we spent on anything in any year.
Damn.
That'd be interesting.
I can do it, quick search, And I'll also admit that over the years, we haven't always been super good at keeping track of it as we spent it. We've done better sometimes than others. Sometimes at the end of the year, I went back and, made sure everything was in there. And, still, even today, I still go back at the end of the year and make sure I've captured all the expenses and coded them right and Quicken and everything. These days with an app and everything, last year, we're starting to do a lot better about the real-time thing. You guys have it so much easier that with Mint, and Quicken has a great online app now too. That's really good. So anyway, the realization hit us that we wanted to give our kids, like in many areas, a better platform in this area than what we had. And so one day I was driving to work and I was listening to the radio, and I listened to, this was before podcasts, I heard a talk show. It was by Focus on the Family, and they were interviewing a lady who wrote a book about how to debt-proof your kids. And so the podcast was on, and it was like fascinating to me. I thought, wow, if I could actually debt-proof my kids, wouldn't that be awesome? So they at the end of the show, they say, call this 800 number. If you give a donation, we'll send you a copy of a cassette, of this show. So I did that. I did my $10 donation and got a free cassette of the show. And I listened to that over and over again. It just so inspired me to do something intentional along these lines and create a system for success for our kids and their financial futures. So we created what we call the Gienger Good Stewardship Program.
Dun,
You
dun,
guys remember? The Gienger Good Stewardship Plan.
The flashbacks are incredible.
So, Kylan, I think you had just gone off to school when I officially rolled this out.
With your
So
credit card
you didn't get the
debt, you
full
just got-
indoctrination on this.
Kylan was too far gone.
But I know when you came home,
Clean slates with
at
the
times we still caught you up on it, and you saw us doing stuff with this, so you picked up on it. And you actually started doing a lot of this, even though you weren't living at home.
Did you?
You did.
Eventually.
The envelopes, the cash envelope system, you started that.
True,
As a
yeah.
result of this process. Okay, so
Still do.
you other three, what do you remember about our rollout of the Gienger Good Stewardship Plan?
Well, kids. I remember when you first... There wasn't a whiteboard involved this time, but you handed us each binders, and on the front of the binder it had like a picture of us in New Zealand. It was our whole family, and it said Gienger Good Stewardship Plan, and you had really talked up this family night, and I think I initially thought, we're going to the beach. And I have a binder, and then I opened it up and there was like a bunch of lines and numbers, and I was like, this is not a beach trip. And then you said turn to page 1, and we went all right through it. And there was this vision and description of this process / system. And there was also envelopes in it, and then we realized that we had to pay for everything. But you gave us a salary. It wasn't an allowance. It was a salary based off of a list of tasks we did to steward the Gienger household, and that you would sit down with us every month.
And estate orchard work, which
And
you
this
were
day,
never a
I
part
was
of.
house cleaning lady. I kept the inner workings
the
of the
orchard.
estate. I bossed you guys around and said, Lachelle clean toilets, Sky dump garbage. Anyway, so
Got paid for it.
Yeah.
anyway, but you rolled out basically like this whole system. And the ground rules were we pretty much, depending on our age, like Sky was pretty young at the time, so he didn't.
I think I was 8.
Yeah, he didn't pay for everything, but like at Lachelle's level, Lachelle was in charge of basically paying like all her bills, and I was in charge of the majority of mine. I'm not sure how old I was. I don't remember the year, but I was pretty young.
Bills, you mean like clothing, any clothing throughout the whole year, any like conferences we went to, or books we wanted, or even like for me, I think books we needed to buy.
For you, it was even your school books.
Like school
Your
books, and I think we handled tuition a little bit differently. But
Yeah.
once I hit college, tuition was different than that. But everything you name it, anything that said child needed for the whole year, we had to have a category for it.
And you paid for it.
And you paid for
Yeah.
it. So if you knew, like at the end of the year, you needed a new winter coat, which is usually, $150 maybe for one that's going to last you years and years. And you had, I think we started with like $30-$40 a month for our clothes budget.
I remember that was
every month.
You probably did. You're
I
just
had
one of us
$10 a month.
for your clothes budget.
But
I could
that
buy
was
a
what I
pair of
had. So if
underwear
I knew
if I
I
was
had, if I knew I had big purchases, then I had to start saving in April for the winter coat. I knew I needed to buy or anything like that. So absolutely anything you would need, from conferences to education to clothing to Shalane had a horse, and she had to do stuff for her horse. And
yeah, no, it was everything except for the food we ate inside the house. It was even like food.
Yeah, food was never part of it.
No,
or
but
shelter.
like we had food out category, and
You
unless
got a
it
dine
was
out budget category.
unless it was a designated family night where Dad was like, "I am paying," we
You don't have to pay.
then
I do remember specifically
like,
one
"I only
time
have
at Olive
$2."
Garden. Yeah, Mom had to beg Dad to pay for Sky's meal because you had spent money on an airsoft gun or something. You didn't
yeah,
have
she's
in
like,
your
"Come on,
budget.
buddy." And Dad, you specifically said there will be no loans.
Yeah.
And then I remember getting stoked because I was like, I think I started out with like, I don't remember.
You hoarded cash.
Oh
I
man.
still do, baby. I think I started
It
out
was
with like
so. She started out with like
three-
$300.
yeah, and I remember realizing that because I was like, do I have to spend it
For a
within-
monthly budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
within each of these categories. And Dad was like, you can spend your money however you want to. And I was like,
Barbie!
I was like, really? And then he was like, but if you run out, there's no loans. And I was like, I will never run out. I never ran out.
Yeah, we did it.
Never
Well,
ran out.
I remember
And so-
you have
so-
like just wads of cash like in her binder.
I
So
still
from
do.
there, we had
Underneath my
envelopes
house.
and Dad helped us create categories. So we literally that night sat down, thought through every category of anything we as an individual would spend money on for an entire year. So you name it, from whether it was a pet to help take
I
care
had a
of,
horse.
or
I had to buy. I bought the horses hay. We had dance class. We
Yeah.
had piano lessons.
for
You
piano
paid
lessons.
for all that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So and to clarify, Mom and Dad would give us a salary, right? So I think mine started at like $450 for the whole month, and so I had $450 for the whole month. And so Dad helped us create categories for everything we would need money for the whole year. And then you would budget each month. So then we broke down our salary into how much we needed each month based on how much we thought we needed for the year. And then you could do what you wanted with that money. But if you ran out, you knew that was it. So you either had to adjust and like not eat out anymore because you used that money for something else, or you chose to put that money in a different category. It was like this concept of when the envelope's empty, like unless you go out and earn
And
additional
the
money.
big kicker was you had to keep track of every single penny you spent,
Yeah.
and if you didn't have it all tracked out by the end of the month, when the next salary would come, Dad would not pay you the salary. And so I remember.
I don't remember that lesson. I think that maybe was just
No,
You just always did it.
we always did it, but
High five.
good job.
Yeah, that was always the policy. And I remember,
Guys, I
a,
learned the hard way.
I remember a handful of times, like I just didn't do it, and
Did you not get salary the next month?
no, I did eventually. I just had to like really think hard and like kind of guesstimate like when I spent the money and like how I spent it.
Because
Well-
it was kind of like balancing a checkbook
Yeah.
where you'd write the date and where you spent it and how much you spent, and then you'd
Yeah.
add it all up at the end of the month.
And you didn't, you couldn't just like track it on the envelope you took it out of. Well, you had to track it on the envelope, and then you had a whole
Spreadsheet.
like other spreadsheet where
That
we had
totaled it
to, but we
Yeah.
had to total it up within each category. You couldn't just go through and easily tally up like how much you spent out of each envelope. But if I took from clothes to spend on food, which was usually the
then
case,
you would transfer it from the clothes envelope to, if you wanted to
Yeah.
spend $10 of your clothes budget on food, you would transfer it from your clothes envelope, $10,
Right.
to your food envelope, and you would
Well,
Like
do
a
an
checking
entry.
and savings account.
Yeah, and you would do
Yeah.
an
That's-
entry.
Write the date.
You would do an entry on. I know sometimes you guys
For
have been the
withdrawal.
system. You would
I
do a
definitely
draw
skipped
entry.
that.
This
Oh, let me-
is a lot.
So you would do a withdrawal entry on your clothes envelope, like literally on the envelope,
Yeah.
minus $10, and it would say to clothes budget, and then on the, to food budget, and then on the food envelope you would do plus $10 from the clothes envelope.
Yeah.
And so that was this. That was.
I
the system of doing
outsmarted
it.
your system a few times, well,
Yes.
a lot of times with that, but I got it. I
Yes.
get it.
And we literally had cash in the envelope, so you'd take the $10 and put it, so there was always an exact
Right.
record, or
You're just
supposed to
transferring money
be
from
an
one account
exact
to the other.
record.
And so here's what I know, and I knew this would happen. So you all started doing it that way because I watched and was very careful because I wanted you to get the concept, right? But once you got the concept of how that worked, that you were in control, and if you overspent in one budget category, that budget category had less money to. If you overspent on food, you had less money to spend on food than you had planned, and you could fund that shortage from clothes, but then you have less money to spend on clothes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to get that concept, right?
Like most adults don't. There's many adults that don't even understand that.
Majority.
Right. So
Dad.
this, and because we didn't, I mean, this is not this was just out of our own pain. So we didn't when we first got married, and it was.
And
Just
then,
blows my mind.
and then before we got our next salary, we had to sit down with you. You wouldn't hand us the magic US bank thing with our name on it.
With the cash in it.
Yeah, the monies.
We had
Unless
And by the way, you each, I don't know if you realize this, but you each got different denominations. We actually figured out the exact, Mom figured out
Yeah.
the exact denominations, how many. In Sky's
Dollars
case, he had
and-
to have some coins because his budget categories were smaller with small ones. So we had to have a lot of ones,
50 cents.
and he had to have a
Oh,
certain number of
yeah.
ones, a certain number of fives, and a certain number of
it
tens.
really messed things
And
up.
Shalane had to have a certain number of fives, tens, 20s, and you had to have five
Yeah.
tens and some 50s.
Yes.
So
Wow.
Shelly had that wired, and that was part of her role.
Another
Bless your heart.
another really valuable aspect of that was there was a savings budget.
Yeah, we had giving and savings.
which essentially took 10% of whatever your salary was into that specific category, and then after say 5 months, then you'd take that big wad of cash. In my case, it was like maybe $50, and then you'd put it in your bank account, and then
Yeah.
that kind of that's
I
translated.
bought a lot of my
into-
car with that.
Most
yeah,
of your car.
no, I did too. And
Which you did that to teach us the difference too between short-term and long-term savings.
Right. You had two
Right.
savings envelopes,
And tithe.
long-term envelopes, long-term savings,
Right.
budget category, an envelope, and short-term, and then of course giving or tithe. And there were two categories. The only two things that we absolutely dictated, controlled, was that it was a non-negotiable requirement that a minimum of 10% went into your long-term savings and a minimum of 10% went into your giving.
And that was with everything we
And
made
those couldn't
out-
be used for anything else.
That was with
Yeah.
everything outside of our
You
budget
couldn't
too. So
transfer that.
if I made money like working for some other, I don't know, if I made it spare money, then I would need to take 10%,
Yeah.
essentially 20% out of that money and put it into long term.
Well, and a few things I remember too. One, this is a little bit more petty, but also brought in a new element of gratitude. I don't know if you realize, but like when birthdays and Christmas came around, if Mom bought you the pair of hiking boots you needed, or Dad bought you the winter coat instead of you having to buy the winter coat, you're like, I'm so wealthy. Like I now have that $150 I was saving to spend on something I wanted. Like you just all of a sudden, like when they bought you clothes or something, or your birthday gifts or anything that you normally would have to buy, it
remember
was like
Mom-
hallelujah.
I remember Mom like a lot of times just like sneaking like a coat here or there for me, or like a pair of pants
to keep the youngest child
without
warm.
really telling Dad.
Dad's
like the charity
no.
organization.
And then
They
Dad would
always
look at me the
told
next
each
day
other.
with me wearing them, and he'd be like, "Where'd you get those?"
I remember that.
But $50 doesn't go far.
Yeah,
So
Yeah, there
as
was
you
a
got
point-
older, you took.
When Mom's like,
Right,
the girls
yeah.
need more than $20 for a clothes budget, Lonnie.
Well, when you started too, they were still covering your clothes.
Good cut.
When you
Yes.
first
We
started.
are
Okay, so let me
a good balance.
let me clarify
no,
something.
I had a clothes budget, and it was $10, and I think it was more of just them playing a joke on me.
They covered the big items for you. The
We
big
need to
Okay.
settle this off.
So that was to.
That's a good
Okay, so let me give you the principle behind this. I'm gonna like lift up the hood here and let you see what was in the engine that you never knew was there.
Oh, good.
Okay, because I know some parents are probably listening to this, if you're a parent, or even thinking about being a parent someday, saying, oh my gosh, I got to make a lot of extra money if I got to pay my kids' salaries too. I mean, where do you come up with all that money? Okay, so here's the truth of how we did it. You want to know how we did this?
I was already paying for it.
Exactly. So
You saved money.
You probably actually saved money by doing
we
this.
didn't increase our expenses at all, our household expenses, by doing this. We actually reduced them. Okay?
Boom.
Slightly, just slightly.
$50.
And we kept them from going up. They became overall much more manageable, consistent. Because prior to that, and if you're a parent, you know how this works, your kids come to you and they say, oh, I need money for this, or I need these new shoes, or I want to go to a birthday party for my friend Janie, and she needs a present, and Janie's so cool, I'm going to get this really cool thing, and how much does it cost? It costs $50 or $100, and the parent's like, oh my gosh, I don't have that in my budget.
Get a job.
And yeah, but you want to make your kids happy, and so you eventually you give in, and it's this constant feeling of like, I want to, but I feel guilty, or I did it and I shouldn't have, and then the kids start begging when you say no, and then they feel bad when you do say no, and it's just a mess. And so this is the part I heard on that talk show that I listened to about how to debt-proof your kids, where she talked about doing something like this with their kids and figuring out how much they actually spent on each kid already. And since we were keeping a budget, it by that time, it didn't take too much to kind of figure out how much we were spending on each kid. You just look at that for a few months, and some we kind of guessed. And then we asked you what you thought to see if you thought it was fair. So what we did is, the older you got, the more we transferred responsibility for paying for everything, right? So Sky, when I think you were, 8 or 9 years old or something, 7, whatever it was when we started this. So, we didn't give you responsibility, for instance, to buy all your clothes. But there were things that we knew that you wanted to buy sometimes. Back then it was like shoes. Like he was really into shoes,
that's
cool
true.
shoes. You remember that?
Yeah.
He's really into having cool shoes. That we thought, okay.
Shoes are like the least. Like,
But back then you were like really into cool shoes.
You always
like
wanted
the latest
like the
shoes.
$80 shoes.
Yeah, and so you would want to buy shoes
I would
that.
buy
7? Wow.
So you would want to buy shoes that were more expensive and cooler, granted,
Legos. What are you talking about?
than what we would buy, because that was evidently the cool thing with your peers at the time. So what we thought is, okay, we'll give you, I think it was like $5 or $10 in your clothes budget that you could use discretionarily. So if we were willing to pay, and I think this happened once. I remember once where we were willing to pay something like $60 for a pair of shoes. And you said, well, can I pay the extra $20? And we said, sure, if you've got $20 in your clothes budget. And you got the shoes you wanted.
Yeah.
Right?
That was slick.
Problem
It
solved.
worked well.
Right.
So when you were young, you started, Sky, with like $50 and very small categories. Like, for instance, eating out.
And fewer categories.
A lot fewer categories.
He maybe had 6 envelopes to start, and Shalane and I maybe had like 22, 25 categories.
My word.
Yeah.
And so when we would give Lachelle, I don't remember, it was 400 or
450
450 when you started.
Yeah.
It was a big stack of cash.
Yeah.
And you would take every bit of that cash and put it in a specific envelope, right?
Well,
to
I
fully
remember
fund each
a lot of
category each
freedom
month.
in that too. As getting older too, I think it does get more awkward. You don't want to ask your parents for as many things. So to have the freedom then to be like, okay, this is how much you have, and then I could choose where I wanted to put it. I remember just like feeling like, okay, this is a heavy responsibility, but overall feeling a lot of freedom of like, oh, they trust me with this. And it was nice to know we always had food and shelter. If we did run out of money, you were like, well, I can survive in the other areas as long as they're not going to kick me out of the house. That's good.
So speaking of freedom, do you guys remember when we rolled this out, I did have a notebook, and it did have some teaching in the front that we went through, and we revisited it periodically. And I actually found that and sent it out to you guys, yesterday, right? At least the kind of the core teaching on that. And I'd forgotten how much of a big deal we made about this, but the hands-off policy, where once we gave you the money, we committed to not criticize you or in terms of how you spent the money or interfere with how you spent your money. Once we gave you the salary, it was your money, period. And the only thing you had to do was to follow the guidelines of the plan and demonstrate your ability to kind of live and manage your salary according to our family values. So like if you would have spent money in a way that didn't align with our family values, then we had the right to interfere there. But we never did, I don't think. But then that also correlated with the concept when it's gone, right? And so
Love that one.
the concept that you won't borrow any money from us, not even for 5 minutes, and there were no advances ever. You guys remember? There were times where I remember sometimes you asked for advances,
or there were times we would sometimes. I remember there being times we maybe forgot our cash envelopes, and we were talking about going out to eat as a family, but we couldn't because 2 or 3 of us had forgotten to bring money, and so we were like, "Well, guess we're just going home." Like, you don't have your money, you can't pay for anything. You
can't just charge it to your parents.
I think I remember one time with Sky having mercy and coming to you, Lonnie, and saying, "Can I?
Hey,
is this
he's
okay?"
7.
So, and the reason I bring that up from the mom's point of view, I didn't want to undermine what my husband was trying to do here.
Yes, you were very
so
supportive
I wanted to
of the process.
support, and I would run stuff by him if I wanted to have mercy in an area.
She wanted to bend the rules.
Usually I did not end up doing that. But you kids know that I did try to have
There were some times
Yeah, Mom was kind of like the balancer of the wrath of Dad.
Mom would look at Dad and be like, Lonnie, do you think? And Dad would just give Mom this
Do you
look
think
like,
they need to eat?
do you think Sky needs this taco?
Well, I tried to do it when you guys weren't listening because I wanted to make sure
Yeah, we would talk about it.
that Dad
And there were times
was
where she said, okay,
respected.
this is going to be a family meal that we pay for when it came to meals. But I don't think we ever did that when it came to like something you just wanted to buy. Because
only food.
Food. We'll keep our kids
Source
alive.
of life. It was usually just food. I think was the only time you really did. It's probably good.
Yeah.
But it was
Sky would just wither
it
away.
was really great to at a young age like learn those concepts, and you're so young at that time that it's just like the norm. It just became like the norm what we did, how we managed money. And so growing up, like a lot of times, I mean, for the majority of adults, when the boys are making faces at me right for the majority of adults, like when they move out, it's a really big culture shock. Like it's a massive big deal because they're like, holy cow, bills, what are these? How do I even, what's a lease? How do I pay rent?
If I don't pay this, then my lights are shut off.
Yeah, and they don't have a concept of savings. They don't have a concept of really budgets at all. They live paycheck to paycheck. I was just in a store the other day, and this girl was shopping like at the checkout line, and she was like, well, this basically saying that this is gonna put her bank account to like 0. Like there's a lot of people who that's just normal for them. They don't have a concept of anything else. Yeah. And for this, just doing this, it became the normal. And so when I moved out, a lot of people asked me like, oh my word, like, how is it? Was it a big difference? And
you were already paying for everything.
Yeah, I honestly...
I've been doing this for years.
Yeah, like I am a veteran. But I honestly really didn't notice much of a difference at all. Like I had budgeted everything out. I had like 6 months of runway. I knew exactly where everything was gonna go. I don't even think I showed you guys anything.
No,
I don't even
didn't.
think we had a conversation. But Dad was like,
totally
"You sure
knew you
you
had
can
it."
move out?" And the guy's like, "I'm moving out this state because you guys are moving and I'll be homeless."
You didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
They moved. You were homeless.
Yeah, but it's because those were the values we were raised with, and so I think it's a huge advantage if you can do this with your kids, like as young as they can comprehend what it means and make that into the norm. And you're doing them a massive favor. And it also gave us an immense amount of ownership over like our lives, essentially. Like I felt like an adult from a very young age because money is like a real thing that adults.
It's real responsibility.
Yeah, responsibility.
Another benefit too is like we're talking about, this is our salary, right? So if we ever did need something beyond what you guys were providing for us, then it helped us get into this mindset of this may be my salary. Like if this is my job and this is how much I'm getting, but if I need more for something, it gave us like this, okay, you know, where do I get more money? So then that's, I think, a big part too of where we started looking for other sources of revenue, right? Like if there was something
This ain't gonna cut it.
yeah, like well, because there was
Yeah.
some categories like that where it was like, well, maybe, you know, mom, like
hygiene.
this is really enough to support my clothes needs, but what if I want to have a little
Your
bit extra
wants,
for clothes,
yeah.
or some wants? So then you do things
I
like
did that on purpose.
Wash windows.
yeah, so mom would pay us like if we washed all the windows and the whole house inside and outside, she would pay us for that whole job or whatever, right? Things that were above and beyond what we just did to provide, you know, help
the
the
normal
house,
day-to-day
right? Or
house
mowing. What we had like an acre and a half of lawn, and so mowing the lawn, trimming all around the edges and around all the trees, and then picking up the, you know, so that whole job, right? I think it was like $20. You know,
And you notice we never paid you by the hour.
yeah.
For anything.
Yeah, but I think too having a
Very
salary
smart.
really fed into, okay, so if I want more, where else can I get money? And so then your eyes are open for, can I offer a good or a service, or you know, you just already are thinking like that for
Where can I provide value
Yeah.
to receive value?
yeah.
But
Yeah, and you're already, you know, to have your, I don't know if Sky at 7 was maybe starting to think like that, but he was probably already looking for ways to get a little bit more money. Like if he did have a pair of shoes, how could I get this sooner since I only have $5 in my clothes budget?
Just because I didn't know anyone else that provided money, it was more like I was just asking Dad, like, what else can I do to make
Right.
more money?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you would ask that sometimes.
Dad, why didn't you pay us hourly?
Because I didn't want to create hourly mindset children or adults. People who said, I'm going to trade my time for dollars. I wanted to create the mindset of people who, what you just said, Kylan, you said it perfectly. You said, I want to create value of some kind to get a value of some kind. And it's about the value you create, not about the hours you put in.
Which, if you're listening, you have kids, and you want to blow this up to a broader perspective, what I kind of do for half the week is talk to people that have a broader perspective on the workforce and the economy and where and education and entrepreneurship and where all those things are headed. And I can tell you, like, one of the biggest skills that your children are probably going to need is less like hard skills and more soft skills like empathy, adaptability, problem solving, working with a team, and a general like entrepreneurial mindset, because the days of being able to acquire a particular set of hard skills or get a certain degree and then get in a certain job with a certain kind of hourly or salary rate for 30 years are they're going fast. Most likely your kids are going to be growing up in a work environment where they're going to have to be a lot more entrepreneurially minded and have more of a freelancer mindset, because more and more companies are starting to look to freelancers instead of hiring full-time employees as well. And a lot of freelancers are paid, you know, by the job, by the project. So it's very beneficial just in a long-term perspective and like mentality and way of operating for your kids as well as they get older and enter into the workforce, because that's kind of where we're headed in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I remember that it was also talked about that you were getting this salary because you made the Gienger family work. Do you guys ever remember any talk about not getting your salary if you didn't, say, do the privileges around the house?
I wasn't allowed to live in the house. That's another story.
Wow, I feel like you need to go into that just real quick.
No, it's what you said. It was a simple concept. If you're a part of this family, then you contribute and you get paid either with this kind of salary.
You paid us when you lived in the house and you didn't want to do chores.
No, he's talking about when he was younger.
When I was younger with mom, before they did this thing with you guys, it was the mentality was more you contribute to the family by doing chores, which we call privileges, And as payment, it's not so much salary, but you would pay for my clothes and food,
Right.
and I would be able to
Before
sleep
we did this.
under the roof, and that was like.
Before we got started.
And remember one time I kept asking you why I didn't want to do chores. You said it's because you're part of this family, you need to contribute, and this is how you're kind of repaid by that. Is we give you a roof over your head and a place to sleep, and I said, I mean, it made sense to me. It was logical. So I was like, so are you saying if I don't live here, then I don't have to do chores? You said correct.
And you were all of 5 years old.
Yeah, so
You're
that's
5 years old, seriously.
That's when I moved into the garage.
And we didn't make you move out. You chose to move out.
I chose to
We
move
helped
out.
because
you.
you didn't.
No, Mom
helped you
helped
move.
me. She said, well, you can live in the garage until you get a job and get on your feet. 5 years old.
And you could eat anything that was in the garage.
Yeah, which is basically canned applesauce and fruit. So that lasted about a day and like half a night, and then I came in and did my chores.
Yep.
But
It was really hard not to laugh, but we would laugh around the corner because it was very serious.
We knew exactly
to him.
what was going to happen.
I tried to run away from home a few different times.
So I'd like to clarify. I'd like to clarify this concept just a little bit. So we did not pay this salary to you guys in order for you to do your chores or privileges, as we call them. You did those privileges, those chores, because you were part of the family, right? What we did is the salary was separate from that, and we actually talked about it a lot. And we just should so what if they don't do some of their chores? Do we dock their salary? And then we thought, that's not how real life works. Like if you break some law or principle, you get a speeding ticket. The policeman doesn't call up your boss and say, reduce their salary now because they got a speeding ticket. No, I mean, you got a fine or a penalty, some kind. So we did actually have penalties. So you got a fixed salary because we wanted you to be able to count on that for the things that you were responsible to pay. But we did talk about, and I remember, in fact, I pull it up here. I think it's actually in this somewhere. Is it?
it's in
Let's
the
see.
small print.
Yes, here we go. Okay, here we go. Here's what it says. Kids will continue to have a list of tasks that they will be responsible to do as a privilege because they are part of the community of this family. Citations with fines may be required if these tasks aren't done in a time or manner agreed. And we talked about that a lot. I remember when I first talked about that,
Did
you
anyone
guys...
ever get a citation?
Your
Points
point
at
is-
Sky.
I didn't.
I never did.
Jeez.
I never did. No.
Kyla?
No,
wasn't
you
even old.
did. I do recall a couple of times, and I honestly don't remember who. I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to protect the guilty here. I do remember a couple times talking about it to one or more
Right.
of you. Do you remember that, right?
Yes. I don't
where
think
you would
we
get
ever had-
frustrated because something wasn't done well or on time or whatever. And we talked to you about, okay, if this happens again, there will be a
citation.
fine for that. You'll need to pay us, X amount, because if you don't do it, we might want to pay somebody else to do that, or that means you're going to pay mom to do that. There was that kind of, and that solved it, because I don't know as we actually ever had.
But I'm sure you read that to us the day you introduced it to us, so we knew.
We did. Yeah.
Yeah, we would always set
This
you
is
guys up
coming
for
if
success.
we
The costs, literally.
Yes. Okay, do you recall the concept of a graduation date from the Gienger Good Stewardship Plan? Do you guys remember how we set up when you exit? When we set this up, do you remember this? Like, this is a lifetime salary, you get the rest of your life?
No.
No?
None of us are on it.
None of you are on it anymore, right? Because some
great
parents
to
may
have
be
an extra
wondering
$4.50 a
about
month.
that. How does that work? Is this forever?
It's more. I mean, I know for me, I just said like I'm good now. I don't need extra support.
Yeah, that's it. I remember.
It's just
I was like, it's cool, guys. I have my own.
don't worry, it's on
Yeah.
me this time.
I don't know if we
So it's like,
ever
got it.
graduated. I think we just all.
We faded out. We were like, you guys don't need to give me this anymore. I've got.
Okay, so this is, I love this. This
Are we
is so cool.
graduating today?
Let's have a graduation
Years
ceremony.
later?
Okay, so this just shows, this is so cool. You guys don't even know that. And
This is
And
working according
Dad's
to
like, I am a genius.
no, when Sean and I talked about it, we specifically thought, okay, so one of the purposes of this is we want to help you learn to be mature, responsible adults. and to be able to manage money well so that you can bless your family and bless the world with the money that flows through you, right? And so we thought, how do we do this where it's clear at the outset that this is for a specific period of time, but that the whole goal is for you to not be on this? So let me pull up, this actually happened pretty close for all of you, but I think in most of your cases, you actually did what you just said. You came to us and said, I think it's time for me to be off this now. But here is what it actually says.
Joanne hasn't gotten to that point.
She did. Okay, the last, it says graduation date. Kids, here's what it says. Kids will graduate from the Gienger Good Steward Plan within 2 months after they are no longer full-time students or when they move away from home, at which time their salary will cease. So we talked about that, and what's amazing to me is that was planted in your brain, and it worked that way even though you didn't know that was how it
I
worked.
don't remember ever hearing that.
That is bizarre.
Do you want your 2 months back pay?
Would have never graduated.
Let's see. Since I'm on this document, let me just mention a couple. At the beginning, we talked about, and this was really what was behind it, some purposes behind our plan. First of all, we wanted to help our kids develop into effective managers of God's resources that He provides them, so that, and we talked a lot about this over the years, so that they can be generous on every occasion in ways that result in thankfulness to God. That's a quote out of some of Paul's writings where he says, may you be made rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and as a result, that will result in thankfulness to God. So that was a big part of it. Secondly, was to teach our kids to be channels of God's material blessings to the world so that people will be led to become devoted friends and sold-out followers of Christ. In case you don't notice the connection there, that last part is part of our family mission statement. So again, we tie wherever we can these kinds of principles and processes into our family mission, vision, and values. The third purpose of this was to help our kids learn to give, save, and spend money wisely, and it was in that order. I don't know if you guys remember, but when you first started, especially the young'uns, and again, you probably don't remember this, but Shalane and I were very intentional about this. We'd especially take Sky and Shalane aside, and we would make sure that the first money you took from your salary went into the giving envelope, at least 10%, and then the next went into the savings, the long-term savings envelope, and then after that you funded all the other budget category envelopes, right? So to help our kids learn to give, save, and spend money wisely and avoid consumer debt in order to give them a solid financial future. And the fourth purpose was to gradually turn over to our kids the money required for their care and support as members of our family. So that's what we did over time. And Sky started, the youngest on this, so he started with just turning over a little bit of responsibility to pay for things for his own care and feeding. And then over time, more and more to where, now you take care of everything yourself, right? And the fifth purpose was to trust them to be good stewards of a portion of the Gienger family resources. So even back then, we were trying to cast this vision without even doing it as intentionally as we think about these things now, that God's entrusted us as a family with some resources, and we want each of us to be good stewards of what God's trusted our family with. And finally was to provide a foundation of personal financial management training that will serve them well the rest of their lives. So on that note, I'd like to transition to, maybe kind of wrap this up here. How has this transitioned into how you do financial management now? And maybe start with Kylan, because you saw us do this cash envelope system, and about that time you started doing it yourself. And again, you probably have done this as much or more than any of us and still do it. So talk about your cash envelope budgeting system.
Yeah, I didn't get to go through that program, but quickly learned the same kind of concepts, mostly through just trial and error throughout the years, and especially starting different businesses. You rarely know where your next paycheck is coming from, and you don't have regular pay. So when you do get money, which is usually a bigger chunk, once every few months or something like that, you have no choice but to budget, and to budget is just to pre-spend the money basically, and so then you build a bunch of systems, and so out of this day I have a pretty kind of souped up spreadsheet that I have, which today, like every week Friday afternoons I do it every single week. I haven't missed for probably how many years you think? A lot of
5?
years. Maybe 5 years. So like this last
He does
Friday.
it even when we're on like trips and stuff like that.
Even when we're on trips.
Wow.
We were
You're my hero, Kylie.
We were in Costa Rica
Man.
last week, and I start a new tab on that spreadsheet for every trip, and it doesn't even serve much of a purpose, but to just keep me in check of what we're spending. I just log every expense.
But I transfer that over to more of like a long-term spreadsheet for tax deductible purposes.
That's true. But we're tracking every expense, so at different stages of the trip, I'm kind of looking like, okay, we spent $500 so far on like food or something like that, and it's because for me, it's all about the management and understanding like where every dollar is coming from and where every dollar is going, and then what's the difference. It's like those are the three things I'm always thinking about. Where's it coming from? Where's it going? And what does that leave me with? And out of that, bottom line, that's what I can use to gauge, like, do I need to focus on making more money in the coming months? Or do I have extra money to throw at this project or that project? Money's a tool. And so that from that bottom line, like what's coming in, what's going out, what's the difference? That difference is what I oftentimes use, like, okay, we can afford to kind of put some money towards this venture or this venture, use this tool for this. It kind of judges the strength of that tool, I guess. So, and then we do the cash envelope system. We don't do it as religiously, like, in detail as we did. Like some months we'll forget to even put the cash in the right envelopes. Like it just all stays in one, but even then it's still beneficial because we understand the concept behind all of it. Our budget categories, we're so used to them, we still spend roughly the same amount, say from like gas to clothes or something like that. But still, we only, throughout the month, we only try to spend from that envelope of cash.
Yeah.
And it just, even the most basic benefit is the idea when you spend money, you're physically handing that money over instead of swiping a card, which is a lot like just mentally easier to do. So you're feeling kind of that pain of handing your money, and you're watching the cash stack get smaller and smaller, and so you get towards the end of the month and it's like, oh, we want to go out for drinks with our friends or something, and you look and, oh, we've only got a little bit of cash left, so maybe we take it easy tonight or something like that. But yeah,
Only one drink.
so that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's great stuff.
Did you want to say something?
I think that there's been some amazing outcomes that we didn't necessarily expect when we first started this. First of all, it was always fun to see how grateful the kids were for anything you got them.
Yeah.
They were so appreciative. And then they learned not to take things for granted. Like when they had saved money and bought a nice coat, they kept that coat nice. And to this day, when they have nice instruments, because this plan enabled them to buy the highest quality instruments.
Because they can just save
and
longer. We had an
vehicles.
instrument budget.
And
Vehicles.
And vehicles.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was
But they're very careful with their vehicles and keeping them clean, and I just have loved watching that outcome. And then another thing is that they've all learned to think ahead, because when you've got a plan that you might need, like Lachelle said, a coat in 8 months, or Sky had to save all of his money to buy his expensive shoes, then you just plan ahead.
Rollerblades on the bottom. Worth it.
Oh yeah, they were Heelys. You can't blame me for wanting Heelys.
They lit up too.
Yeah.
And what we've seen as well is that the two married kids have found frugal mates. True. We laugh,
Sounds really
but it is
You're a frugal
hilarious.
mate.
not
I mean,
attractive.
Tay watches every single penny, and so does Oren. And so between all of these benefits that we did not even think about. It's just a good plan over and over again.
Yeah, and again, in case you haven't hung around our family much, and if this is the only podcast you listen to, our family is not all about money. The reason we're talking about this is because the reason we're talking about this and the reason we focused on this is because we don't want to be all about money.
That's right.
I have found over the years that the people who don't focus on good money management, wise and careful money management, tend to be the ones who, at the core, are more about money because they have to be, because they're they're stressed about it, they're worried about it's going to come, or they're feeling guilty that they spent it, or they're anyway, it's just
money controls them.
Yeah. And that's a great way to say it, Kylan. That our goal here is that money doesn't control us or our values or our lifestyle or our happiness at all. I mean, money is not something that should have anywhere near that kind of influence or control of our lives. So the only way to do that is to be intentional, create your systems that work for you personally or for your family so that you control money, right? Then money doesn't control your life or your happiness or your health or anything. And just such a world of difference. I remember when we first started budgeting, how it was so wonderful not to be stressed or we didn't fight a lot over it, but there was tension or there was arguments or should we spend money on this or that or the other thing, because we had different backgrounds like everybody does, and I'd want to spend more on something than she would. Like in one thing, we've always had a budget for our ongoing education, and we fund that a fair amount, and we make those decisions ahead of time. We made the decision long ago that one of the wisest things that we can do, that education, that wisdom is worth more than gold. It's worth a lot. And so to fund that budget category, so when there's a conference coming up, we'd take you kids with us to conferences.
We each had a conference budget. I had a conference budget.
Yep, and so we transferred that concept to you early on. And by the way, this is interesting. So because you already had demonstrated you fully embrace that concept, that education, that wisdom is worth more than money.
Yeah.
We entrusted that responsibility to you to have an education, a conference budget, and knew that you would spend it wisely. So we didn't do that for Sky. We paid for him to go to the same conference that you would pay for until he adopted that value himself, right? And then we knew he'd kind of spend that money in that category that same way. So anyway, that's an example of way we transferred some values through how we manage money.
Right. I think something else along with that, though, is that you can't be afraid of where you're at either. So if your finances are not where you want them to be at, you can't be afraid of it. Don't put off looking at your bank account until the end of the month and then be surprised. And granted, I take care of the business finances, but every day I'm looking at all of our banks. I look at every single one of our bank accounts. I know exactly where we're at every day, what's coming in, what's going out, and you can't be afraid of it. You got to know where you're at so that you can manage it.
That's great.
So, yeah, it takes acknowledging where you are in order to create a plan on how to get somewhere else. So
yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap up with that concept. Figure out where you are in this whole process and do something to take a step or two in the direction of where you want to go. So if you haven't ever budgeted, don't feel guilty. Just start with a couple of categories. Start with something and say, okay, I'm gonna keep track of how much money I spend. I would recommend picking what are currently your most discretionary or maybe what you feel are maybe kind of out of control categories of spending. Like if it's entertainment for you or dining out or whatever, start with a couple of categories and just at least start by tracking how much you spend in that one or two category of expense, right? Start there and then expand from that. And you'll find over time that it creates a lot of peace and joy.
And fun, because I remember we have a date night fund.
Yep.
And that is something to look forward to. If you don't spend it all in 1 month, then you can take a bigger date.
Go crazy.
Yeah.
Is that how you guys are going to Costa Rica?
We have, actually this one is frequent flyer miles for the trip. And we're doing, it's been quite beneficial. But So here, that's a great point again. Budgeting, like a lot of systems, budgeting is just a system. It brings freedom and joy. Because you make decisions ahead of time about how you want things ideally to work, and then it brings so much joy. We used to stress out about going out to eat, for instance, on our dates, and then we created a budget for our dates, and we looked, and if we had enough money in the budget, then yeah, let's go eat out. And if not, with great, let's have a picnic on the bed. You know.
Well, we used to have $50 in our date night budget, and that was for a month. But we went on dates every single week, so you can imagine there was only 1 week a month
we would actually spend money
that we would actually go to the movies or
You got to get creative.
go out to eat. So we did have to get creative, and it was amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. I will post some of these concepts, or maybe this document that I've referred to that I found in the show notes. And as always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions about this. Talk to any one of us or contact us on social media or